Okay, before I get into this video, I need to make a disclaimer. Because this is the internet and people don't really think. So obviously I'm not an expert. I'm not a cop, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an academic. I'm just a mentally ill nutcase in my bedroom having an opinion and expressing it, whether that's sensible or not, because as I mentioned, I have mental illness. So you don't have to listen to anything I say. But if you're the kind of person who complains because I'm not an expert or whatever, or because I'm not part of a specific group who has skin in the game or whatever other thing you want to come at me with for being the wrong type of person to have an opinion, if you think that's going to upset you, don't watch this. There are better commentaries that, maybe talk about what you want to hear, or, just support your own opinion if that's what you're looking for. Yeah, I just want to get that out of the way because the internet is the internet. People don't understand these things. They think that every video on YouTube is like meant to be polished, and I'm just talking off the top of my head too. This is not meant to be an essay. I am not that kind of vlogger. I'm the kind of vlogger from almost 20 years ago at this point. I refuse to become polished. I just need to get stuff out of my head sometimes. So, with that out of the way, and hopefully the people who don't get it have left and gone to do better things with their time than watching me, I want to just talk about this whole, what do they call themselves? The National Socialist Network, or basically these neo-Nazi guys, right? They did this protest outside New South Wales Parliament, and it's been really interesting seeing the news coverage of this. But I wasn't going to say anything really until I guess it might have been Mum actually who asked, Mum and Dad, they're chronic news watchers, and I've been trying to disconnect from the news. So that's another disclaimer, is I haven't kept up with every single development on this. But yeah, I think it was Mum who asked, how could they get away with this kind of thing, and why didn't the cops do stuff? And it just got me thinking about things, and also, how did they get away with it? But also, what can protesters more broadly learn from this? Because there've been a lot of protests in Sydney over the past while, and some are done better than others, and in past years as well. And it's not just Sydney, I know. But yeah, watching protests, and me not being a particularly political person, because like I said, I'm trying to disengage from all this stuff. I'm more of a centrist. I made a centrist trolling video a while back. Anyway, and also, I am of the mentally ill sort where I don't have strong emotions, so I see something like this, and I'm like, it's just another dumb thing that happens in our world. So I'm not having the same emotional reactions as other people, and I thought maybe I would just share some thoughts. I know it's a contentious issue, though, so again, if for some reason you're still here and you think you're going to be easily upset, maybe just bugger off, okay? Put away your keyboard, put away your phone, whatever. Go do something else. Go do something more productive. But, so, yeah, a lot of the commentary in the media has been, saying, oh, the cops let them do this protest, but then they banned the Palestinian Action Group from doing the Opera House thing, and blah, 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 and, just sort of getting outraged about that and saying, oh, we need new laws to shut this stuff down. And then on the opposite side, you've got the civil liberties guys who are like, no, we've got to have freedoms, and this is a dangerous, what do you call it, slippery slope, blah, blah, and we're just gonna ruin everyone's rights and blah, blah. So, it's those two extremes, the ones who are just, nothing but outrage, and then the ones who are like, wait a minute! And, anyone who's been watching me for a while, I like nuance. And what, okay, nuance. When I say nuance, I'm not talking about these guys being justified in any way. This is... unfortunately, people like this do exist in the world. But what I want to look at is, how they're protesting and why the cops probably couldn't do much. The first thing is the cops, I think they put in these guys, in one article I read, they actually got, legal advice. And what else did it say? I'll put this article, there's one article I found that was actually reasonable. And I'm going to address some stuff from that later, but what do they say? They got constitutional and criminal lawyers and barristers who supposedly support what they're doing, but like, you know, they got legal advice. They filled in their form, and I think the cops have like a week to push back. And like, if they said, oh, we're just going to have 60 people standing around for 20 minutes after around 10 a.m., which is what they did, the cops, like, you know, if the cops weren't paying attention to the group that has applied for this, I can see how it would just slip under the mountains of paperwork that some poor office probably intern was sorting through, like, oh god, there's another protest thing. Oh, that's a small one, we don't need to worry about it. And if they weren't paying attention. So there's that one. Somehow it slipped through. The head of the police reckons he didn't know about it. The premier reckons he didn't know about it. At least, like, you know, the last that I looked. I have not kept up to date, as I said. But beyond that, okay, so then once they actually set up, do you see how they're just standing there? They're not even blocking the road, and it looks like they're standing back from the path too, so that people can walk past them. So they're not even blocking the pathway. These guys, they've actually been very smart about the way they've gone about their protest, because I think they know that they are up to no good, and they're being very, like, you know, they know that their opinion is very unpopular. They know they're being provocative. They know that if they make one mistake, the cops will sweep them out of there. But, you know, you can see they're just standing very quietly. Apparently they were chanting slogans. The only one I can find was something about, like, what is it? Blood and honor, which, like, I'm personally not familiar with, but apparently it's some kind of Hitler Youth thing. I don't know, I haven't been able to find, you know, in my brief searches, I haven't been able to find, like, if they said anything else, and I guess that, like, there was some reference to them filming it for their own social. Are they on social media? Would they even get on social media? Whatever. It sounds like they filmed it for their own circles. It's probably being used as propaganda to recruit people, and probably that's all that they, you know, they just needed to get some decent footage and cause a stir. But yeah, no, so they chanted something, but it doesn't look like they've done much more than stand there. And, like, chanting, did they shout it? Were they screaming it? Doesn't look like it. They look very calm, right? So just from standing there, it's kind of hard to say that they're causing a huge amount of trouble. Now, they are being intimidating, but can you really just say, like, a bunch of people wearing black? I mean, like, almost every music subgenre, you have a bunch of people wearing black standing around, like, outside gig venues, and you're not going to move them along. And it's like, where's the line? Where is the line that this turns into something that you can definitely say is intimidating, and the cops can sweep them away without any legal challenge in the courts? Because, like, if the cops move too early, these guys would take them to court and be like, you've not followed the law, and, like, the whole mess that is. And then, like, if you look at their slogan, it says, abolish the Jewish lobby. They have chosen that very cleverly to not, like, you know, it's the Jewish lobby, so they can claim it's political speech. Australia does not have, like, a Bill of Rights that says you have the right to free speech, but there is in the Constitution, from memory, like, some kind of implied right to political speech, and so they have made that, even though we have hate speech laws, they have made that a politics thing. So there's that. They have done that on purpose so that it's very hard to get to them. Now, also, I thought maybe there might have been something worse on there, because the ABC, which is the main one that I usually end up catching, the ABC blurred out some of it, but it turns out it's just their White Australia website at the bottom. So yeah, I thought there might have been worse there, but no. So White Australia has the racist connotations, but it's not blatant enough to really be swept away. So I think the cops were in a difficult position, and they probably, you know, whoever was watching this is probably like, hey, you know, on their radio, like, we've got these guys doing this protest, we've figured out they're neo-Nazis, but we can't figure out, like, what specifically we can get them on. And so they're probably going back and forth on the radio, or I don't know. And then these guys, they only stuck around for 20 minutes. So by the time the cops are like, okay, maybe we should clear them out, it's probably too late, you know, like, 20 minutes, that's not long enough to really, you know, go in and sweep them out. So there's that, like, you know, I just think that the way they've done it, they've put a lot of thought into how can we get away with doing a neo-Nazi protest outside fucking Parliament House and not have the cops get away. And like, they've achieved a lot with this, because as well as filming, you know, apparently they filmed their own media for it, you know, for their propaganda, as I said. But on top of that, they've gotten themselves all over the news. Like, this is what, 60 dudes, 20 minutes of their day. And the news has been playing them at least a week. When did this happen? I think it was like probably more than a week ago. And they've just been constantly in the news. They've caused so much discussion. They've gotten so much publicity from this. And like, what is the point of protest? A lot of sometimes if a protest is big enough, you might be able to sway the government, but a lot of the time it's just about bringing attention to an issue, maybe swaying a few voting members of the public. In this case, I'm sure that what they want to do is recruit, because they're not big enough. I mean, I've heard that they were trying to make their own political party, and the AEC, the Australian Electoral Commission, they have to be impartial. So if there's no really obvious grounds to deny them, they might actually get a party together. And so, like, you know, I think they've achieved their goals, and the media is actually kind of unwittingly feeding into it, and like the politicians are unwittingly feeding into it, because they're like, oh, we've got to have all these new laws. But like, it's tricky. Like, the civil liberties guys, I get it, you know, they're mainly pushing for freedoms, but I think also it's tricky because when you have protesters on the other side, however you limit these guys is going to limit everyone. And you have to make sure that if you're going to ban something, it's going to be very specific, because otherwise you could inadvertently step on legitimate protest rights, as opposed to these guys. The problem with being super specific, though, with those laws is then these guys can find a way around it. Because, like, for example, I think they were protesting something about hate speech. I don't actually know if the law is in effect yet, or whatever. Regardless of whether it's in effect, can you see how they've said abolish the Jewish lobby? So they're already finding ways around the specific hate speech issue, if that makes sense. Like, the more specific you are, the easier it is to get around it. But if you try and make it too broad, then you start screwing up the people doing legitimate protests. And so that is a very tricky thing. And I want to come back to some other things. So comparing this also to the Palestinian Action Group. Well, for one thing, like, the Palestinian Action Group, they did a very successful walk across the bridge with, you know, I think, was it like 100,000 people? It's like one of the biggest protests, at least of our time. I wasn't around in the 70s, so I don't know about all those. But, you know, it was a huge protest, but it did get to a point where the cops had to pause the whole thing because they were starting to worry about crowd crush. Because, you know, there's only a certain number of ways off the bridge. You can't go off the side if the middle gets too squashed. And if you've watched any of those YouTube videos about crowd crush, it's legit. It's not a joke of a concern. Like, the cops had reasonable concern that there were too many people squashed into one area, and so they had to get everyone to just stop where they were and have a controlled exit off the bridge. And then I don't remember how long after that, but then the Palestinian Action Group, they wanted to protest on the Opera House forecourt. Now, the Opera House forecourt only has a capacity of about 6,000 people, and I think they were expecting 20,000 people. And when it comes to banning protests, you know, the cops have to be very careful not to pick and choose what topics people are allowed to protest on, because that's not how democracy works. You know, people have a right to make their political speech. What they tend to focus on is the safety aspect. So they got the Harbour Bridge one approved because the Harbour Bridge is huge. I think more people turned up than they were expecting, and that's probably where the issue came in terms of overcrowding and having to pause the march towards the end. The thing about the Opera House one is a capacity of 6,000, and the organisers reckon they'd have 20,000 people. You can't have that in that space. Like, that is a recipe for disaster. And can you imagine if the protest went ahead and people did get crowd crushed, and then, you know, it's right near the ocean, you'd have to be rescuing people from the ocean as well as the crowd crush issue. Like, you know, if people are trying to escape into the sea, it's just like a nightmare scenario. Like, it's the wrong place for a protest that large. Obviously they couldn't do the bridge again because there's a point where, like, you can't just keep blocking traffic constantly. You are going to turn people against you, which is what some of the climate activists have had issues with. Because also, the climate ones are funny though, because, they're blocking people from getting where they are, so they sit in their cars for longer and burn more fossil fuels, and it's kind of counterproductive in that sense, but also pissing people off. Now, granted, a lot of these protests happen on a Sunday. I don't remember what day this was. But yeah, no, with the whole Opera House thing, I mean, the organizers said, oh, we can totally just, have people moving through. I'm just going to get rid of this picture because it's distracting. They said we can totally just have people moving through in, a kind of a march through the Opera House thing. But, how do you make sure that the right number of people are going in and out? That needs some serious crowd control. And then where are they going to go after they've gone through the Opera House? And, are they not going to be there to listen to some speeches or, chant something? Or, I don't know. I can see why that one didn't go ahead, because it's just, such a tricky thing. Actually, I will bring this back up. Meanwhile, this is 60 guys just standing on the street. Look how much space they have. So you can't really get on a safety ground, because they're not even, not only are they not on the road, they're not even taking up the full pathway. The guys in the middle are a bit more, but you can easily get around them. So, a member of the public could pass by them. I don't know who would want to, but, yeah. And, I think they learned their lesson from, I think a few years back, they all tried to get on a train to go to some probably Australia Day thing, I don't know, and then they got kicked off the train, because if you have I don't know how many people it was, but let's say 60 guys all dressed in black, all getting on the same train and all looking very scary, that's super intimidating. But if they got in separately, it's a lot harder to spot a huge group like that gathering being intimidating. I don't remember if they dressed up differently on that incident. And then, they just gather, and then once they're together, you're like, oh shit, but then they're only together for 20 minutes. It's it's complicated, right? Okay. And I also want to bring up, so the article that I'm going to link down below is from The Guardian, and it's like an explainer, and it goes through, could police have stopped it? And there's a bit of discussion over some of the hate speech laws that I think these guys were protesting, but yeah, it sort of talks about the difficulty and does this count, does it not? And the cops, they can make judgment calls when it's really obvious, but for something like this, I think it's easier to go in later, identify anyone who was a source of trouble, and then arrest them, which I think they've done. And one of the guys has been deported, so things that they are experiencing consequences, it's just not at the time, because it's just the way they set up this situation is really difficult. But yeah, so this article goes through is it possible, and the whole thing about them chanting as well, should we ban specific phrases or specific types of phrases. And yeah, you have the civil liberties guys saying, you're just giving them what they want and blah, blah, blah. You're making them control everyone instead of just them. But yeah, let me bring up this one. There we go. So, we've got a counter-terrorism expert saying that, if you don't change the laws, right, they're just going to adapt their strategy like they have here. This is how they say abolish the Jewish lobby, instead of explicitly saying whatever the Jews. Do you know what I mean? They have been very sneaky about that, and they've done it as much within the law as they can. So, of course they would. And yeah, it's made people get creative in how they communicate their allegiance to these ideas. So you would start getting more and more coded language. And if the language becomes too close to mainstream language, then it becomes hard for regular people to speak. Even what was the Nazi quote? The blood and honor thing. That sounds like it could have been a phrase from a video game. If they didn't tell me that it was a Hitler Youth thing, I genuinely wouldn't have known, because I don't keep up with this stuff. And then, yeah, rather than a knee-jerk reaction, needs to be a more well-thought-out response to the complex social problems that are driving people to join the groups in the first place. Now, this is an interesting one, because a few years back, maybe 10 years back even, I first saw it on a Samantha Bee show. Like, she had her own late night show for a bit. And she interviewed some guys from an organization in America called Life After Hate, where these neo-Nazi guys, they get out of the group and they're like, oh shit, look what we've done. And I think the leader was like super guilty about having recruited so many dudes. And he was explaining, like, you know, it came from feeling like they didn't have a place to belong, and then they have these groups come along and being like, join us, you totally fit us, and that's how they recruit them. So, you know, I think what this guy is saying, the counter-terrorism thing is saying, is like, you know, if you can address those problems before impressionable people end up in this kind of a sort of cult, I guess, you know, you stop them from joining in the first place. That's probably the better way to do it. I mean, once they're in, it's very hard to break through. There are people who've done it, and like there was, I wish I could remember the story, but like there's a story from a long time ago. I saw an interview, and it's about like how this, I think it was a black priest, I don't know, and he managed to like go up to the KKK and, you know, was just somehow, just by talking to them, he managed to like break through to some of them. And like, I wish I could remember what that was, because like that story, if it's true, I don't know for sure if it's true, but like, you know, I mean, first of all, the balls on the guy to just walk into the KKK as a black dude, but then to like, you know, do his whole priest thing and actually break through that. Like, you don't. I mean, I'm not saying that people need to go and do that, but like, it shows that it can work, but it is so much harder, because like that would be so dangerous for a guy like that. You know, just like I said, the balls on him. But yeah, no, with the Life After Hate thing, it's like, I don't know if they do, I don't know if they just break people out. I think it's more like once people realize what they've done and they get out and they're trying to rebuild their lives and trying not to fall back into it, I think maybe that's what Life After Hate supports. And so it gives them somewhere to go. Because like, you know, if you think about cults, when you leave a cult and you get shunned, I mean, one of the reasons people don't want to cross the cult is because they don't want to be shunned, because they don't know how to get through life in any other way. And I feel like that's kind of similar. Like, you know, if one of these guys realizes that this is not the way, like, what's he gonna do? He may have been identified and like screwed up, like, you know, screwed up his career if the wrong people find out, and all that kind of stuff. And then like, how does he atone, and where does he get support while he's like trying to come back to normal society? I don't like this. They say we don't have that sort of thing in Australia. In the absence of strategy, and this is all that, in the absence of strategy, all we're going to do is keep reacting to headlines and then keep platforming the groups. As I said before, the media has been elevating this. So like, they stood around for 20 minutes and it's been on the news for more than a week, I think, at this point. And it's like, yeah, I don't know, like the current strategy that we have regarding this is not, I don't think we have a strategy. It's more just like the politicians are like, right, we'll try another law. Oh shit, that one didn't work. We'll try another one. Oh shit, unintended consequences, and they're still doing it. You know what I mean? I think it's a lot more of a trickier issue than what the media is making out. And like, this Guardian article is like the first one that I've been able to find. I mean, granted, I didn't do a whole lot of work because I'm just talking shit off the top of my head. But this article actually going into it, I mean, yeah, they put this at the bottom. But at least they mention this kind of stuff, like the complexities. And, you know, how much power do we want to give the cops? Like, yeah, the cops probably could have moved them on, but they were already moving on after 20 minutes. And you know, just doing their thing and not getting in the way. So that's a bunch of stuff about that. But what I wanted to finish on before I completely lose everyone with my umming and ahhing, what can regular protesters learn? What can regular, like, you know, this whole thing about what are we going to do about this? Difficult stuff. But what can regular protesters learn from this? I think regular protesters could use some of this strategy, because they have done everything as much within the law as they can and made it very difficult for the cops to move them on. Meanwhile, you have some of these other protest groups who end up getting arrested by the cops or don't have their protests approved and all this kind of stuff. And then they come along and they're like, the cops are so mean to us, whatever. And sure, there are some bad cops out there, but they're not all like that, and they have to do things by process. They're not allowed to go out of that. They can't just like knee-jerk kick these guys out if they can't identify the legal basis under which they can definitely do it. I think when it comes to like a wilder protest and there's actually violence going on, the cops, it's much easier for them to step in there. And, you know, if they overstep, it's not as frowned upon. Like these guys, if the cops went in too soon, too hard, like, they would sue the shit out of them. Like, you can just imagine if they put this much planning into it. Whereas people at protests, a lot of the time, I gotta say, they haven't thought it through. Like the ones I said with the climate protesters who block roads and make people, you know, we still mostly have petrol cars here, so people are mostly burning more fossil fuels, sitting there going like, I've got places to be. And sometimes they're blocking people who have mobility issues and they can't get anywhere. Like, you know, public transport might not be the right thing for them in, you know, because public transport here is a bit dodgy. And anyway. Just like this sort of planning and this whole thing about, you know, they've made a spectacle without having to block streets. I don't know, like, you know, obviously they have the advantage of being obviously controversial and obviously provocative in the way they've presented themselves. And I think that's a little bit trickier for other groups to do. But yeah, you know, the running around yelling about things doesn't really work. Like, did the Palestinian Action Group have any impact on what's going on in Palestine? Really? Like, did they change the politicians' minds? I think the politicians were having a lot of trouble figuring out what to do. And, you know, then Trump and friends. I don't have the energy to keep up with how that's going. It sounds like it's done more than people were expecting it to, but what comes next, I don't know. But, like, that's where the progress happened, from a bunch of, like, I mean, I have mental illness and I still know that stuff is crazy. The way that they made that ceasefire happen, and, like, you know, Trump trying to get his goddamn peace prize. Oh my God. America is just nuts. But, like, that's kind of where the power is. The protesters, I don't personally think, like, they did very much. Like, the you know, they can spread awareness, but we don't have any elections on at the moment, and there's only so much that we can do in the meantime to influence the politicians. Yeah, and so then some of them have been arrested, or they've been disappointed by not being allowed to protest. And, like, you know, they also kept protesting after the ceasefire happened, and it's like, okay, but what exactly do you want the government to do? There's not a huge amount that they can do at that point. I don't know. I mean, maybe they did call for something and I just have protest fatigue, which is another risk if you're constantly protesting. These guys protested once, as, like, you know, in recent times, and they've been on the news for a week, more than a week, and they've caused so much fuss, and people are, I've got to go to dinner in a sec. Whereas the Palestinian Action Group, they've been protesting week after week. I think they have to protest, like, every week since the whole war started. And, like, what has that done? I don't know. I think the Harbour Bridge protest was probably the closest they got to, because, you know, that got international attention, and I think these guys, have they had international attention? But I just think, like, you know, regular, normal protesters protesting about normal stuff could learn something from this. I mean, you know, I went to a protest once, which was to do with healthcare, when bloody Tony Abbott and friends were trying to bring in some kind of copay thing. And I went to that, and the best speaker of the day was a GP who was very sensible. He didn't repeat anyone else's points. He actually cut his speech short. And I thought, oh, this is great. And it was ruined by the Socialist Alliance chick who came up and started screaming about, you know, capitalism and communism and whatever, and didn't actually address the point at hand, and then was like, who's with me? And we're all like, what are you talking about? I mean, you know, I get it, idealistic students and whatever, but there's a smart way to protest. And while I'm here, if you've done petitions online, you know, change.org is not how petitions work in Australia. You might get enough attention to it, but if you really want to make a petition in Australia, you have to go through the official processes. If you're going to do an e-petition, it has to be through the Parliament's website, and then you should go and publicise that. Change.org, see, the politicians don't have any legal requirement to look at change.org. It doesn't matter how many signatures you get. But if you get over a certain number of signatures on the official petition website, or if you do a paper petition properly and you reach a certain number of signatures, they do legally have to respond, or legally have to present it in Parliament, depending on how many numbers you get. Like, it's actually a thing. And it just frustrates me that a lot of activists, you know, they complain that society, like, democracy doesn't work, blah, blah, blah. But the thing is, they're not following the actual processes. These guys looked at what are the laws, what are the processes, and they've found a way to weasel their way in. Whereas your regular average protester, they just go out and protest. They don't look at how the democracy works. And then they're surprised when nothing comes of it. And I think, like, you know, the strategies they used, very smart, you know, sort of evil genius in a way. I think regular protesters, if they sat down and thought, how can we do this to actually get impact, instead of just going out and being outraged and then wondering why it's not working. Yeah, I don't know how you would do it, because I'm not passionate enough to get in there myself. And you know, that one health protest I went dressed as the Grim Reaper. It was fun. But yeah, I was just so unimpressed with the way that went down, especially once that chick got up and started screaming. I never went to one again, because I'm just like, I don't know who's going to be speaking. I don't know who's going to claim to speak on my behalf. Why should I go to these things? And then what did we achieve? I don't know. Like, I think we briefly got on the news, and then, like, you know, for one news story, and it was gone. We didn't get weeks of coverage like these arseholes did. So I'm just like, you know, I'm running out of time to articulate my point, but I think you get it. Like, if you're protesting normal stuff, you need to be smarter about how you do it. Someone is coming to tell me it's dinner. I better say, yes, I'm coming. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I know, I should stop talking crap. Yeah, I don't know, like, there's probably something that can be learned, and I know, like, not everyone has the resources to figure out what's legal and all that, but it's just about, like, being smart and having the strategy and realizing that come on, pop up. Yes. People don't like when you block the roads. People don't like when you just go around screaming. That's not how you get people onto your side. Now, obviously, these guys aren't getting most people on their side, but they've worked out what works for the people who are vulnerable to their message, and it's like standing here being all tough guy and filming their propaganda and whatever. So, you know, yeah, a bit more strategy. This is what I get for not scripting, by the way, is like, I feel like I had a better way of articulating this before, and I can't remember what exactly it was that I was going to say or how I was going to say it. But I just think, like, regular protesters could be smarter and have more of an impact if they actually looked at what the laws are and were sensible. Like, don't try and fit 20,000 people into a space that only has a capacity of 6,000. It's basic stuff. Like, you try and do that, of course the cops are going to shut you down, because, like, the safety aspect of that. Can you imagine if that protest went ahead and people started crushing each other. And then instead of a protest, you have an emergency situation and it gets known for all the wrong stuff. And then, I guess I just want to leave you also with one story about the cops following process. I was on a train one time and there was a $5 note on the ground and, I think there was maybe like three or four cops happened to board. I don't know if they were looking for someone or what, but they saw the $5 note on the ground and one of them picked it up and said, "Oh, is this anyone's?" And no one put their hand up. And so one of the other passengers said, "Oh, it's yours, mate." And the cop said something like, "Oh, I can't, I'm a cop." So I don't know what the exact law is or was back then about cops not being able to just pocket money they found on the ground, but for whatever reason, this cop was saying he's not allowed to just keep money he found. He's got to give it back to whoever it was. Now, I know people hand in wallets to the cop shop all the time. Wallets, though, tend to have ID. If it's just a bank card, you can send it back to the bank, and the bank will know how to get it back to whoever it belongs to. But, if it's just cash, they probably have to go through some process where they have to, "Hey, come here, where they have to catalog it and, maybe it stays for a certain amount of time and then it might eventually get into the gate. But this is like $5 and they're just going to sit on that, take it back to the station, fill out a chunk of paperwork. So instead, what the cop did, he spotted a family sitting together and he actually went over to I don't know if it was one kid. He went over to the kid sitting with his family and said, "Hey, you dropped this." And now we all know the chances that the kid dropped the $5 note's probably not what actually happened. But in that situation, now the cop, first of all, he made the kid's day. Because what kid doesn't want $5 just falling into his lap? At least, back when cash was more of a thing. You can still buy stuff with $5. You could get some lollies. Like, we used to love buying lollies. Anyway, I can't do sugar that much anymore. Look at this face. But yeah, so what the cop achieved, apart from making that kid's day, is he had this sort of plausible story where he's no longer taking the money himself. He also doesn't have to log it at the station. And what if the kid did drop it? We can't prove it either way. So, no one else claimed it. It's the kid's now. And I just thought, that's an incident that sort of stuck in my head for ages of there are good cops out there. I know the worst ones are the ones that tend to get on TV, but there's quite a lot who got into it for better reasons. That's not to excuse what the shit cops have done, but I do think, the ones who are better don't get the credit that they deserve. And when you consider Australian cops versus American cops, sometimes I think some of the issues people complain about, they're complaining about American issues and not realizing that Australia is different in a lot of ways. We have some similarities, but I don't know if anyone remembers APEC, when the Chasers War and everything, they dressed up one of their crew, one of their cast as like Osama bin Laden. They made a car with Canadian flags and they drove it right in. Somehow they managed to pass the ID. They didn't think they would get that far. They thought they would get stopped. And then there was a point where they're like, "Oh shit, we shouldn't go all the way up to the meeting because, if we get too far, we didn't prepare for this legally. We didn't get the advice and all that." So at that point, they got their fake Osama bin Laden to get out of the Canadian car going to this big world meeting. And that's when the cops are like, "Oh shit," and sort of, gathered them up, escorted them out and all that. And I remember, I think maybe Dad saying at the time, and there was a bit of commentary as well, that had that been in America, they probably would have been shot on sight. Because, Americans shoot first, ask questions later, whereas Aussies are like, "Oh, it's those fucking comedians again." Or, they don't even know. They're like, it's an Osama bin Laden in a Canadian car. Something weird's going on there. We need to figure out what's going on. So instead of just shooting them, it's a world leaders event, but they took the more sensible approach of, what is going on and what do we do about it? And yeah, Aussie cops, they're not perfect, but they are different to American cops. And I'm aware of the race issues in America. America is just a lot more extreme on so many fronts. Anyway, I better get this boy settled and get myself to dinner. And I hope I didn't upset anyone too bad with me being so unemotional and sort of being like, look how clever these guys were. But you gotta look at the strategy, and that explains, I think, why the cops couldn't do much. And it's not as simple as just like, oh, the cops are racist or whatever. It's not that simple. They have to follow processes. And unfortunately, processes and bureaucracy, it does get in the way, but it's there for a reason. Because otherwise, like, can you imagine if the cops got to choose who gets to protest and who doesn't get to protest? And what if it's something that really needs to be protested, but they've decided for whatever reason you're not allowed to? Like, the civil liberties guys do have a point, and it's also probably not going to solve the bad actors, because they just find ways to get around it. Anyway, I think you get the point. I mean, I could go on forever trying to account for every possibility, but this is an essay, and I've got to get to dinner, and this boy is getting very cross with me. But you do love all these. Would you like to do a trick so that anyone who made it this far, can get the real star of the show? Hop up. Hop up. Yeah. Hop up. Head down. Peekaboo! Alright, I hope that made it worth your while. We're going now.